Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Orbit Football Podcast. Today, we will be recapping Week 8. Was a pretty top-heavy week, I will say. Very interesting late week. A lot of news off the field really came out this week. That's still kind of developing that we'll get in later in the show, but obviously we got to talk about the first game, the biggest game of the weekend, really the start of the round robin of what is the Big Ten East this year. Ohio State takes on Penn State, defeats them in the horseshoe 20-12. Really big game. Kind of looked like Ohio State. I mean, the score doesn't really show it, but it seems like really in that second half, Ohio State dominated this football game. And Tyler, I'll turn it over to you now. What are your immediate thoughts after this game?
So we obviously seen Ohio State play Notre Dame in the early part of the season, but we really haven't seen Penn State tested. Their first test was against West Virginia. That was week 1. Handled business there, but as we've seen, West Virginia, they started off hot after that, but they've dropped the last 2 games they played, including the one this week to Oklahoma State, which is pretty big implications to the Big 12. But this is the first time we've seen Penn State, especially in the midseason, actually get tested. And the defense, I mean, it's as good as advertised. I mean, 20 points against Ohio State. Ohio State did blow some chances, but Penn State, they came up big when they needed to, and they gave the offense plenty of chances. But at the end of the day, this offense it did not have enough firepower to beat Ohio State. I feel bad for Drew Aller. I don't think it was all on him. I know he's getting a lot of blame. I think the coaching staff could have done a bit better, and also think the weapons for the Nittany Lions could have they could have showed up a little bit bigger. It was really Lambert Smith, and that was about it. The offensive line, especially in the second half, not as good as advertised in the preseason. Just JTT having a big day on Olu Fashanu. That's big for Ohio State because if they can find him, especially ways to get pressured down the season, that's going to be huge because him and Jack Sawyer, both the premier edge rushers from that class, really have not produced that much in sacks or even pressure rate. So, big day for the Ohio State defense. They looked fantastic. Davidson, Bigneson, want to give him a big shout out. Came up really clutch. He, one of the big plays that JTT had, he actually audibled JTT to get down on the line. So the fact that he was able to see defensive line alignment and where he should have been, and and ended up getting I don't know if it was a sack, but it was definitely a pressure that led to a sack. It's big plays from him, and especially from guys like us, we're Ohio State fans. Denzel Ward being out, I wasn't worried, but the fact that we just haven't had it just seems like there's been a complete lapse in recruiting and just development of secondary talent. And with the way Denzel has been playing, Jermaine Matthews played great in this game. Davidson obviously played really good this game. It's really good to see the Ohio State defense back. If you're an Ohio State fan, the Silver Bullets, they were all over the field. This Ohio State defense, man, it looks really good. 12 points. Let up, obviously coming one of those touchdowns coming in with the within the last minute and a half of the game, and I don't know if they finished with 6 yards in the second half, but I know that's what they had at some point in the fourth quarter, which is
what they had
nuts.
before that last scoring drive. They had in that second half was 6.
That's just nuts. But I mean, it was a great game for Ohio State. Penn State, obviously, you have to, you gotta get up and going. In 2-3 weeks, you're gonna be playing Michigan and Happy Valley, and obviously you lose that, you're not going to Indy.
Yeah, basically Penn State at this point needs help to get where they are. I got a couple thoughts, most of them about the same as you have on this game. Penn State just could not do anything on offense when it mattered in that football game, which it's the same thing for them the past couple of years. The same thing for them that arguably could be said about the program, really since Joe Paterno left the program. It's been the same thing. James Franklin has rebuilt that program back up to be a nationally respected program, but he, obviously a lot of people calling him overrated. I don't think he's overrated. I just think that he can't win the big games. He wins the games he's supposed to, but he can't win the big games, and that comes back to burn Penn State year after year after year after year. But when it comes down to it, like you said, the defense in this game from Ohio State, I personally think a lot of people were like, oh, is this bad offense or is this good defense? I think that, it's a little bit, for Ohio State, it's good defense and a little bit of bad offense. Not to discredit Mr. Marvin Harrison Jr., who absolutely, led that offense to the victory in the game. Ohio State was without a lot of players, which is a big thing in this game. Obviously, you mentioned Denzel Burke was out of the game, their top corner, who's playing like an All-American this year. And that allowed, Jermaine Matthews, the freshman, he had to step up. We saw him last week against Purdue. He had a really good game against Purdue in that second half, and he had a really good game against Penn State. The other thing, like you said, Davidson Igbinosun on the opposite side, he really stepped up in his spot. Penn State could not throw the football, and the winner of this game came down to who could throw the football, and it was Ohio State. But really, I don't think the way that this game played out needed that. I think Penn State was I think Ohio State was just a better team, like period, like clear cut better football team. Obviously Penn State's got to get Michigan, but I don't know if they're going to be able to get Michigan. I needed to see this team against a team that wasn't, I needed to see Penn State against one of those one of these teams. And now that I've got them, I think I figured this team out this year. I've said all year, all offseason, they're a year away, and I still think that. I think they're a year away from really being elite. They were really good last year, lost a lot of talent last year. They were really good this year, but they're not elite. And I think we kind of saw that on Saturday. And a lot of that has to do with their receiving core. Dante Cephas was a big guy that we had our eyes on as a transfer from Kent State because he had a fantastic year last year, and he's been quiet. He has not been able to really do much at all. The only really receiver who's been able to do something for Penn State this year was Keandre Lambert-Smith, and he was dealing with a little bit of an injury in the game. So, where does this Penn State team go besides 10-2, in my opinion? And I think that's their cap. That's the cap for this team. But Buckeyes and Wolverines. I think that game's going to be we're going to see a 1-2 matchup in the Big House come late November, and I think that game's going to be a classic. I think that game is really shaping up to be two of the best, if not the best, teams in college football squaring off against each other, and I will reflect that in my rankings this week. But and that's really starts the round robin. Ohio State gets the victory over Penn State. Now to another game. Talk about second half dominance. Let's talk about that. When you look at your calendars, it was the third Saturday in October, folks, this weekend. So that means Bama took on Tennessee. This game at halftime, 20-7. Tennessee loses the ball game, gets shut out in the second half by Bama. Loses the ball game 34-20. Bama, I think we've got them figured out. Slow starts, fantastic second halves. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, and especially with this one, this game just reminds me of a classic Alabama team. They just sucked the soul out of Tennessee. It almost felt like Tennessee. It felt like they could feel Alabama coming back, and they had no answer at all. It was really impressive by Alabama. Their defense, especially in the second half, was unreal. And offensively, they figured out some things. They were able to run the ball down the field, and starting at the very first half, second play, 2-play drive, just 51-yard bomb to start it off. I mean, if Alabama's going to be able to consistently be able to run an offense like this, which statistics will tell you it will not work, but they're doing it so far, and they're doing it through, especially what I think is going to be their last, two of their three hardest games that they've already played in Tennessee and Texas A&M. Now you get that LSU game, you get it at home. Obviously, that is a must-win, especially with LSU only having one conference loss. But you do have you have a 0 in conference play, and there's only one other SEC team that can actually say that, and that's Georgia. So I don't know. This was a big win for Alabama. Tennessee, I mean, I thought they played a good game. I really did. The first half, they were impressive. They took advantage of some Alabama turnovers, especially in the one of the ones in the red zone that I know. They got a picked ball in the end zone, which was huge. But I don't know, Alabama. This just felt like a classic Alabama win. Maybe not the way the first half went, but I mean the second half. That's probably the best half of football that Alabama's played all year. And 2 weeks out from LSU, it's a good sign for the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. This Alabama team is really, they've found their stride, and the way that they're doing it, it's kind of like you said, those Alabama teams of old, even though they're not really built like that, those teams, because they don't have a dominant offensive line. They can't run the football. They really only get a lot of their scoring off of chunk plays, off of big plays, but it works. And whatever works, that's all you got to do. And I think that we were seeing that from Alabama, that, yeah, they don't have all the pieces in place this year, but they're still, they're dangerous. I would not count them out this year at all. They have the talent to do it, obviously, on their roster, but, like you said, that LSU game is going to be a really big game. We're going to have our eyes on that one moving forward here in a couple weeks. But I don't know. I think that Bama, just week after week, they keep doing the same thing. They keep just kind of getting off to slower starts in the first half, kind of finding their footing, and then in the second half they dominate. At least it's what it's been against the ranked teams. Now, like you said, I agree with you. Tennessee, very respectable showing in this game. I still think that they're a very solid team. It's just, they just, like you said, they were on the road. They didn't have an answer. They could not do anything in that second half. It was just all Alabama, and the Tide rolled, and the Tide rolled pretty darn well in that ball game. So Alabama, once again, they control their own destiny in the West, still undefeated in SEC play. Really only got about they got 3 more SEC games, I believe, on the schedule. They've got Kentucky. They've got on the road. They've got Kentucky. They've got at Jordan-Hare, obviously, for the Iron Bowl at the end of the season, and then they have to host LSU, as we talked about, which is going to be where most of the eyes are going to be. But those are 3 pretty opponents that could do something to Alabama. But I think that they would obviously be favored in all 3 of those games, and I would not expect maybe any different outcomes in all 3 of those games than what we've seen from Alabama this year. But speaking of some outcomes that might have been a little different this weekend than what I had in our pick'ems this week, you and Blake picked this one right. This one was very, 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 very interesting ball game.
You were right for about 50 minutes of the game.
You're right. I was right for about 50 minutes of the game, and then the last 10 and change it went the other way. But Miami defeats Clemson double overtime, 28-20. Clemson could not punch it in on 4th and short. Miami comes out the victor with a backup quarterback at that. Tyler Van Dyke was out of this ball game. They defeat Clemson. Clemson might be in the mud, and you might be earning a little bit of monetary benefits here shortly, won't you be, Tyler?
Yeah, I with 2 of our unnamed friends, I had Clemson 8.5, had the under, and it looks like I don't know. I'm hoping I'm doing good. I was kind of worried, but this game kind of helps me a bit. But with this game, I mean, it's weird because Miami was down the whole game, but to me, they looked like and felt like the better team. It just they did not have a quarterback to go in it, and then out of nowhere, Emory Williams just, like, the last 10 minutes of the game just becomes RoboCop. I mean, he's out there slinging deep balls. Receivers are coming down with it. Completely different game, and it worked. And I don't know. Clemson really didn't have an answer because they couldn't run the ball when they wanted to. And, they got in a 3rd and long, especially twice at the end of the game, and Miami goes down and ties it. I mean, that's just it was interesting because I think that like I said, they weren't that better. Like, Miami was better, but man, when we're talking about Dabo-led Clemson team here, my opinion doesn't change on Dabo, but this result further solidifies the need of change in that program because Miami, one of the youngest teams in the country, and they just took it to Clemson, who's, I wouldn't say they're one of the older teams in the country, but I mean they're very experienced, and Cade Klubnik, I mean, he did own up to that 4th down mistake, but you cannot do that, especially when you go completely off script like he did, and ended up costing him the game at the end. Big win for Mario Cristobal. First win against Clemson at home since the 50s, and that helps a lot in conference play, especially with how they've started their conference play part of the season off. And for Clemson, I mean, you got to answer back. You got, you know, you don't have the easiest schedule in front of you, and you know, no matter how bad South Carolina looks right now, all it takes is 1 week for that narrative to flip, and you know, that South Carolina game is going to be big for Clemson, especially at the end of the year. Just, I think, you know, if Clemson manages to stumble on that game and they lose that game, I don't know. That could signify the end of the Dabo era, and at Clemson.
Yeah, I agree with you here. I think that it's not working out right now with the amount of changes that have happened in college football. Clemson's just kind of they're in a rough spot right now. You know, Dabo, obviously he has his way of coaching. He has his methodology, and that methodology is a thing of the past. And I think we're starting to see that it's passing him over. Like you said, Miami, big win for them, big win for Cristobal. I believe it's his first ACC win at home since he took over that Miami job. So I mean, that's a big win for him. That really could, you know, there's still Miami, you know, a couple things bounce their way. They could be looking at, especially with what else happened in the ACC this weekend, they could be looking at a possible, you know, conference title appearance. They still got to play Florida State in this season. That's going to be a very interesting game. You know, Florida State, they did beat Duke this weekend, mostly because the second half Duke was without Riley Leonard.
It was a wide open conference, my friend.
It is a very wide open conference. You know, North Carolina, despite getting upset this week by Virginia, they're still in the hunt. Like they're still there. Obviously, Duke is still a player, and so is the team that they play this weekend that they got to travel to the road to. Louisville's still in the conversation. They're still there. Things could bounce their way, and we could be looking at them, but there's still a lot to play out in the ACC the rest of the year. I think it's one of the more interesting conferences because the past couple of years it's been the least talented. And this year, I think it's comparatively to others, it might not be at the top, but it's interesting the way that this conference is played out. There's some, yeah, it's fun. It's fun. I think that's a great way to put it. But speaking of talent in conferences, let's talk about maybe the most talented conference in its final year in the Pac-12, and we are seeing possibly, I don't want to say more solidification on what Lincoln Riley is as a head coach, but I think that's the best way that I can describe it. Utah defeats USC, goes on the road. That game, Utah obviously was announced by Kyle Whittingham that Cam Rising's out for the season. He'll be returning next year. He's done for this year, so they're going to have to roll with Bryson Barnes and Nate Johnson. They rolled with Bryson Barnes against USC, and he led a fantastic game-winning drive that was capped off by a field goal that was made by Utah, got them the victory. It was a walk-off field goal on USC's field, and USC, I mean, that's their first Pac-12 loss. They're still kind of in the hunt, but, there's a lot of talk around this program right now, and a lot of talk about Caleb Williams leaving. I know Emmanuel Acho said something about it, and that, created a bit of a stir. But what does how can USC move forward with this?
Like you said, Emmanuel Acho telling Caleb Williams to sit out, nothing to play for. Well, Alex Grinch should sit out. He's pretty bad at his job, and when I say sit out, he should probably be sitting at home for the rest of the year. But Lincoln Riley's not going to be able to do that because Lincoln Riley he loves this man. I don't know what Alex Grinch has on this man, but it has to be something damning because this defense is horrible. Utah, obviously, like you guys said in the preview, you and Blake, you just did not trust this offense to be able to be powerful enough to be able to take USC down, and you thought USC was probably just going to kind of roll over them just with their offensive ability. But why couldn't this happen? They haven't shown the ability to be able to stop anyone. Notre Dame is the biggest defensive game they've had basically against a notable opponent, and they still dropped 48. Yes, a lot of that was offensive issues, but still, even when Notre Dame had the short field, they still scored every time. It's just this USC defense is going to be a major issue, and you know, like you said, it's a Lincoln Riley team. The offense is not the issue. The offense is the one that went down the field and scored, but the defense is the one that went on the field with about a minute and a half to go, and they lost it for him. And I don't know. Bryson Barnes, shout out to him. He played a fantastic game. Another guy I want to shout out, Sione Vake, absolute baller of a player. He plays damn near everywhere on the field, offense and defense. He should be getting a lot more talk than he does. Fantastic player, had a great game. Just Utah, man. I had a weird feeling that we're gonna go into that game and take it, and I did say that I think that USC would win. I wasn't gonna pick them, and they're showing me why I'm never gonna pick USC probably for the rest of the year. If we do pick them, and obviously we'll probably be picking them at least twice with their upcoming schedule with the absolute gauntlet they're about to play in the last few weeks of the year. But like I said, man, this USC team, man, it needs help. And is Lincoln Riley going to do it? Because we're coming up to an off season, and if nothing changes in the next year, who says he's going to be safe there? Because I would imagine if he goes in the next year and say they do finish this year 8-4 or 7-5, and he starts off the next year with a few losses early, their schedule ain't easy early, especially with coming into the Big Ten. It's gonna be different, and normally teams who do transition do not do well the first year, and we're seeing that in the Big 12 right now. I don't know. He's gonna have to get on his horses because Washington, Oregon, and UCLA. Man, those aren't easy games.
Yeah, and even to an extent, Cal's not an easy game for him. I believe they play Cal on the road, and Cal has been a pretty solid offensive unit this year. That's who they have this weekend. That's an interesting game. I mean, Cal's been a team that's proven that they can score points, and USC's defense, like you said, much to be desired on that unit this year. Utah, I had a suspicion. My gut said to lean USC in this game because I just thought that Caleb Williams it was going to sit there and was going to have his game. And I mean, he played fine. He had a pretty decent game. I'm not going to lie. He like you said, the offense was not the issue, but Utah just sat there and clawed around. And I did say in our preview, I said if Utah can make this game close, if they can just sit there in the weeds like they've done the past 2 years, they're going to win this game because I've seen it happen 2 times last year. And that's what happens. Utah just sat there in the weeds. They kept it close, and there it was. They beat USC, and deservedly so. So good win for Utah. They've got an interesting game coming up against Oregon this week. That one we will definitely keep our eyes on. But something else that we're keeping our eyes on right now is recent news that came out. I believe it was Sunday morning. I ended up reading this. It might have been yesterday, actually. I think it was yesterday. We're recording this on Tuesday. So Monday, I had noticed that Quinn Ewers obviously was out of the majority of the fourth quarter of Texas's game. They took on Houston on the road. They escaped with a win. One of a couple teams that escaped with a win. Washington also had a tight game where it was a little bit ugly, but they grinded out a win. But Texas went on the road. They faced Houston. They escaped with a win, but Ewers, I believe it's a grade 2 AC sprain in his throwing shoulder. So he's going to miss a little bit of time there. The timetable isn't exactly there, but it's looking like, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, possibly a month if you want to look at it. But he is projected to return in the regular season. But Texas has an interesting game in 2 weeks that I think you and I are starting to keep our eyes on just a bit. And that's against Kansas State, who's really flipped around their narrative by starting Avery Johnson at quarterback. Who's really kind of revitalized that offense. Not to mention they did use Will Howard too a little bit in their game this weekend. But what kind of does this mean for Texas in the coming weeks?
Yeah, for Texas, I mean, I know the program feels really good about who they're gonna actually be putting in there. But you're a little lower on Ewers than I am. But I think I think Ewers is probably I wouldn't say top 5, but definitely top 10 outside the just right outside that top 5 era. But Malik Murphy gonna have to come in. He looked fine against Houston when he was in. But yeah, like you said, that Kansas State game, Kansas State has a lot of momentum right now, and I think a lot of the country is noticing that right now. So, yeah, it's gonna be interesting because Texas' secondary. It's probably the struggle of the team, I would say. And Kansas State, they're pretty good offensively. So that game's gonna be interesting. Malik Murphy, though, I don't think he's going to have to make too many big plays. I think Sark will be able to get an offense around him. I think he looked fine against Houston, and, that's a Quinn-type offense that they're going to be running. So as long as he can just make the throws he needs to, I think they'll be fine. But, yeah, that Kansas State game, it should be a pretty good one.
Yeah, I think we're going to keep our eyes on it here in the coming weeks. But more news off the field. We kind of hinted on this in our preview show when we discussed this team because we really hadn't discussed them much this year, and we wanted to get them in before their matchup against Penn State in a couple weeks. But Michigan, more and more information just keeps coming out with this Michigan Wolverines program. So for those, obviously, I'm going to recap here. News came out last week, it was on Thursday, that the NCAA had received, and the Big Ten had received information from Big Ten opponents of Michigan that they had been involved in a sign-stealing scandal. And come to find out, we got this information really Friday, late Thursday night after we recorded our preview show, but Connor Stalions, I believe he's an off-the-field analyst for Michigan is what his official title is for the program. He was involved with the program. His pay was very questionable. Some say he was an intern. He was unpaid. Others have payments for him that from Michigan, since it's public institution, that he was getting paid over $50,000 a year to be this off the field analyst. But the biggest thing about it is that there had been pictures of him sitting at games for Michigan opponents, future opponents. The past couple of years, a lot of what has been reported is since at least 2021, where Michigan obviously defeated Ohio State for the first time in the Jim Harbaugh era, went on and won their first Big Ten championship in the Jim Harbaugh era, and then made the college football playoff. Obviously, it continued in last year, and obviously it's been continued in this year. But Michigan had suspended Stalions with pay, correction. He was suspended with pay, but Jim Harbaugh and a lot of the higher-ups had claimed that Stalions, they had not known that they were not informed of the sign-stealing scandal that Stalions had been involved with, that he had been conducting. But the thing is that more evidence has come out after the weekend has ended. Obviously, the game with the Michigan rolls Michigan State, as we thought they would, but more evidence is coming out now against Stalions and against Michigan. I know a lot of talk is surrounding, obviously, their rival in Columbus, Ohio State. And Ohio State, it was I believe the publication 11 Warriors, an Ohio State, a publication that covers Ohio State pretty in depth there in Columbus, had posted their photographs from the Michigan sideline. It was during the game last year that was in Columbus. They had pictures from the game, and on the sidelines you can clear as day see Connor Stalions by the defensive coordinator, by the offensive coordinator, by Jim Harbaugh with a packet of laminated papers or laminated materials in his hands on the sideline, standing there against the Ohio State game last year. And he was standing behind Harbaugh too. So for somebody not knowing of what's going on, he was right there behind Harbaugh in the Ohio State-Michigan game. And apparently this has been going on for a couple of years now. So that's a little bit fishy there with Harbaugh denying. That's going to be something to keep your eye on moving forward in this. But yeah, I want to know your thoughts on this, Tyler. What do you think is the most likely outcome for Michigan in this situation?
So another thing that's also floating around just on Twitter, nothing official with this. Obviously, it's on a social media platform. Anything of this could be out of context or wrong, just in general. But they actually were able to track down his Venmo, and he has a lot of interesting transactions, a lot of T-shirts, but they're Just it doesn't seem right. Like we're talking like 20 to 25 orders on in the same month, and especially there's one that is pretty weird. It says Stallions paid Chase Evans, which Chase Evans is a scout on Michigan, and the tag, or I guess the comment of it, was GA, and that was the day before the Ohio State Georgia Sugar Bowl game, playoff game, Peach Bowl, yeah, sorry. But the day before, and it just says GA, and obviously with that, going to that Ohio State Georgia game, that was actually not illegal if he was there to scout that game, just because it was not a conference game, it was a bowl game, and obviously they were probably scouting for that game. But also, if they're there scouting for that game, why would they not be there scouting every other game? Because obviously they didn't get there. But just a lot of weird stuff going around around the Michigan program. And personally, I'm as a professional, I probably shouldn't say this, but I think a lot of institutions cheat. They just do not get caught. And I think the NCAA has a head out for Michigan right now. But with a lot of this stuff and what looks like to be pretty damning evidence, you can't get caught doing this stuff, and it's gonna come back pretty heavy on them. When, I don't think anyone knows, but I think it's gonna be within the next 3 years, I would say, and I think it's gonna be probably a level 3 violation, which would be some pretty heavy fines, heavy sanctions, definitely some vacated wins. Vacated wins. Morally, you could accept it or deny it, but obviously it's going to happen. Something's going to happen. It's not going to be good for Michigan, obviously, but I think it's a big question on when rather than what, because something is going to happen. It's going to depend on timing. But yeah, I think the NCAA has their I think they have their hammer out, and I think they're ready to swing on Michigan. But I also think that you just can't get caught doing this stuff, man.
Yeah, I think that's more so what's the issue with this is Michigan's getting caught with it, and the amount of, or really a lack of cover-up. Like you said, Stallions had deleted. We had talked about, I don't even really know that we talked about this, but he had also deleted most of his social media accounts.
Yes.
But he kept his Venmo public.
He also deleted the Venmo, though.
Okay, so he recently, so now that, and usually
within the past 8 hours he deleted it.
Exactly, and usually signs like that point to somebody that is guilty in a situation. So I think that yes, he was involved with this. But I think the trouble that's going to come on Michigan is that they knew about it. Very similar to how a lot of these sanctions and issues come about is because if they would have reported this when this happened and they knew about it, let's say this comes across Harbaugh's desk. Let's say he doesn't know about it for a while, for like the first for even the 2021 season. Comes across his desk in 2022. Hey, coach, we've got this guy who's doing this. You got to be loud and clear right then. That's where these programs get in trouble, is when they lie. That's the biggest issue where I think that Michigan's going to be in trouble. But not to mention that Stallions also had bought, I believe I saw the stat was yesterday, I think it came out from Pete Thamel, it was 30 tickets, or tickets to 30 Big Ten games over the past 3 years. And it was reported that he had 2 tickets for the Ohio State-Penn State game, one on each sideline. So, I mean, like you said, it's pretty damning evidence right now against Michigan. The more that comes out. Shout out to all the internet sleuths out there that have been uncovering all this information.
And I think
great work.
Another thing with this is that they are the ones that suspended him, but now all this evidence after they've denied everything, it's coming back on him, which I think is another I think it's almost certain it's happening. It's not good for Michigan. It's I don't know. I think they're caught in a lie. I think the NCAA knows it. I think everyone knows it, and it's just a matter of time.
Yep. I think you're right, and I think part of what I'm thinking of how this might end is all USC style. For those that know about USC, obviously about 15 years ago, they were caught up in sanctions with Reggie Bush and players and open doors and their issues with their sanctions there. But the writing was on the wall for Pete Carroll, and he left town. Writing's on the wall probably here in a couple of years, if not more quick of a timetable for Jim Harbaugh, and he's had a lot of talks about going back to the NFL. don't be surprised if Jim Harbaugh goes back to the NFL here either this offseason or next offseason or any time in the future whenever he knows about what's going to happen to his program. But part of the inside jokes or the jokes that we've kind of made together is that maybe Michigan's selling its soul for a national championship this year. And that might be it, because they might be going out there and saying, well, we don't care what we're going to get from the NCAA. We're going to go beat the heck out of everybody, and we're going to go win a national championship. And, at the end of the day, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. More power to you. Nobody's going to take away what happened on the field, but, obviously they might take away it off the field and in the record book. But, that really wraps up our conversations there with the Michigan topic. So we'll round out this show with our new top 25s. Tyler, I'll start with you. What are your 25 through 21?
So I have this team following all the way from 13. Clemson, I think they're about to hit a brick wall in terms of forward movement. I think I don't know. I think it's going to be a pretty rough end of the season for them. But I got A&M at 24. I got K-State back in at 23. UCLA goes up from 23 to 22, and even in a loss, I think Duke looked great. Got him at 21.
So I bounced Clemson out of my top 25. I had them a lot lower than you did. I had them at 22. I bounced them out. But a team falling, I think, all the way from 16 for me to 25. USC at 25. I think that program honestly could finish this season 6-6. I don't think that's out of the question. But we'll have to see what happens. 24, I've got Texas A&M. 23, I've got Duke. Like you said, with the loss, I was still impressed by them. They look fine. They just need to get Riley Leonard healthy, and they can contend. But obviously, he was still hurt, and he re-injured his injury with his sprained ankle in the ball game against Florida State that really knocked him out for the latter part of that game. But Duke at 23. K-State enters my poll once again. Kansas State at 22. And at 21, I have Tennessee despite the loss.
I have Miami staying put at 20. Notre Dame at 19. Ole Miss 18. Missouri 17. And a bit higher on them still, but still pretty low on them. USC at 16.
At 20, I have moving up this week Arizona. Funny enough, I do have them at 20. Maybe the best 3-loss team in the country right now. At 19, I have Miami. Obviously, good win for them at home. 18, I have UCLA. Very good defense. They switched things up this weekend a little bit with the quarterback play, and it worked out very well for them. They had a really good weekend. So keep an eye on that and the way that they're going to play ball the rest of the season. But Missouri's going to be at 17 for me, and at 16, I got Notre Dame.
At 15, I have the Vols of Tennessee. 14, Penn State. Offense just has to be better. 13, LSU. 12, Utah. And 11, the Beavers of Oregon State.
At 15, I have Ole Miss. They still sit there for me. 14, I have LSU. 13, dropping down with that loss. I do have North Carolina. I think that, it wasn't like that Virginia just kind of got lucky and that Virginia outplayed them in that game. And when you lose to, one of the worst teams in the Power 5, you've got problems. I still think North Carolina's a good team. I still think North Carolina, might be, still my favorite to win the ACC, but they still got some things to figure it out. At 12, I have Utah jumping up a little bit this week. This team's good. This team's good. We're going to see them in a stylistic matchup against Oregon this weekend, and I'm excited for that game. But at 11, I got the Beavers, Oregon State at 11.
I have North Carolina at 10. Don't have them dropping as far as you do, but still have some concerns. Florida State at 9. Oklahoma at 8. I have Washington dropping down to 7. I have Alabama back at 6.
At 10, I have Penn State. Like you said, they just got to figure out something on that offense, man. I still think that they do have talent defensively, but I notably from what I believe I had said in our preview of this year, I was very high on Penn State last year. I thought Penn State was a top 5 team in the country last year at their peak. Really an argue between them, Tennessee, and Bama. But I thought Penn State was a top 5 team in the country last year. This year, though, there's a difference. And it's partially because the rest of college football is very competitive this year, and it's partially because I don't think Penn State's as good of a team. Funny enough, I don't think they're as good of a team this year as they are last year. It's a very similar team, but I think they're just a step down this year. But Penn State at 10, Oklahoma goes to 9, Florida State at 8. Bama, I moved them up to 7 this week. The more I think about this team, the more I'm just like, yeah, they're good. They're Bama, they're good. I got to come to terms with that. But at 6, I have Texas.
At 5, I have Texas. Oregon I have at 4, and my top 3 is going to stay the same from last week. Ohio State at 3, Georgia at 2, and the Wolverines of Michigan at the top spot.
So my 5 and 4, I think they only really bumped up one because Penn State fell out, but I'm keeping Washington at 5. Obviously, they had a struggle win, but they got the win regardless. I still think that team's very good. And obviously with what's happening with Texas and everything around that, when I compare those teams 5 and 6, Washington, I got them at 5. Oregon, I got them at 4. Georgia, I'm going to drop down this week. Georgia goes from my 1 to my 3, but it's not because I don't think Georgia's good. It's because I think these two teams that I got at 1 and 2 are the best teams in the country. And one of them I had at 1. The one at 1, I've had at 1 for a majority of the season, and the one at 2, I think that they're very good. But at 2, I got Ohio State, and back to my number 1 spot is Michigan. They take their crown once again as the best team in the country, in my opinion. We both agree on that, and that will be all for this episode. We wrapped up our top 25s there, went over a couple games of the week. Make sure to follow us on all of our socials and keep note on us and whenever we post and wherever we post. We'll be back at it later in the week talking about our previews for week number 9, so we'll be right back at it then with Tyler, Blake, and myself. But for Tyler, for this episode of the Orbit Football Podcast, this is Cade signing off.